One of the dominant ideas, in the book Between the World and Me, which is, effectively an extended essay, told in a letter form to my son, is the notion of fear. Because I think when people think about African American communities, there are a lot of things that come to mind, but one of the things that does not come to mind, I think, enough in the mainstream conversation is simply how afraid we are for our bodies, how afraid we are for our children, how afraid we are for our loved ones on a daily basis. The threat of violence is always there. And I think about how much of my mental space was possessed with keeping my body safe. How much of it dealt with how I was dressed, who I was walking with, what neighborhood I was walking through once I got to school, how I conducted myself, in the school, and not so much, in such a way that would be obedient to my teachers, but in a way that would keep me safe from the amount of violence. The threat never quite leaves us, because once we're no longer afraid of the neighborhood, it turns out we actually have to have some fear for the very people we pay taxes to protect us. And that's what we've been hearing about for the past year over this country. We've been seeing a lot of that, and it seems like there's a kind of national conversation going on right now about those who are paid to protect us, who sometimes end up inflicting lethal harm upon us. But for me, this conversation is old, and I'm sure for many of you, the conversation is quite old. It's the cameras that are new. It's not the violence that's new. We are not in the midst of a new wave of anything. The sort of violence that folks saw, in the 1960s, in Selma, for instance, on Bloody Sunday, that sort of violence was not, in fact, actually new. That's what white supremacy, what racism is. It is an act of violence. What was new was the cameras. There was certain technology that was able to take that into the living rooms of America, and we're going through a similar thing right now, but the violence is not new. And so for normal Americans, once they, rise up, and get out of, certain neighborhoods or go certain places, they feel a kind of safety that black people never feel. Fear is one of the dominant emotions of the black experience. Fear. And it does no amount of money you can earn can ever take you away from that. You can be president of the United States. You can literally see it evolving across American history. You can see the notion of race evolving from the time that first group of Africans get here in 1619, changing how people talk about things. We know it very well. It's very, very disturbing when you think about it too, because one of the things that people say in order to comfort themselves is, well, in 2050 we're going to be a majority. The dominant, majority in this country is going to be people of color. But white people have moved the boundary before. Right? you act like it's been consistent, and people don't realize that. There was a time when Irish people were not considered white, Italians people here were not considered white, Jewish people were not considered. The lines move. As the power needs the lines, there's nothing natural about this. There's no natural line that says Hispanic or Latino. It's, you know what I mean? There's no natural line that says black.
And now I'm going to get
My earliest memories are of black men in jail, of being physically restrained. So I was aware of, I'm talking 4 years old, I guess, is when the point when you become maybe somewhat conscious of what's happening in the world around you, 3, 4 years old. These are my earliest memories. And so this fear, this deep-seated fear of bodily harm never leaves. In fact, it marks African American life and may be the premier marker, of the black experience under white supremacy in this country, perhaps everywhere. I'm seeing people that want to live free. I'm seeing people that want to live independent of that fear. I'm seeing people who have been boxed in by American policy to live within that fear. And I see people who want to be free. One of the arguments of the book is that you are your body. The people who do damage to our bodies do, in fact, do damage to our minds and our souls. And the act of liberation is ultimately always physical. Even reading is a physical act. It's a physical act. There were incredible black folks here at Howard. I had never imagined the black world to be that large. There was really just a sense of ancestry. I'm not a particularly spiritual person, but one would walk across the yard and you could feel like ghosts walking behind you, right? There was just a great diversity of people, of opinion, and all of them, united under this one thing, under this idea of being black. I sat for a good afternoon and read James Baldwin's The Fire Next Time. this is like the origin. This is like, the beginning very much for me right here. So this place we're sitting in is very, very powerful, very, very important to me. I didn't come out of the church. I don't have an intuitive understanding of what religion gives to people. I just don't, you know what I mean? I didn't really grow up in a Christian household. I grew up in a household where folks had respect for religion, but it was not a huge, huge force in my life. And so I'm very distanced from that. I think, for both good and ill, it probably marks my writing. I don't know where the arc of the moral arc of the universe bends. I don't see it necessarily bending, towards a more just world. Sometimes the world is more just, sometimes it's not. Between the World and Me is, I hope a work of art. It's a riff on how we have to talk to our children, and I hope it serves to confirm and validate the experiences of Black folks who are out there and who are going through this every day.